Teachers know great professional development when we see it. It resonates with us. It makes sense to us. It is actionable, preferably right away, and implementing the ideas from the PD will improve our practice and our students' learning. Like I said, we know it when we see it, but what are the most effective ways to plan for it? And how do the organizers, participants, and school leaders know it has made a difference? Hi, and welcome to Educators Going Global, where we invite aspiring and veteran international educators to expand their knowledge of all things related to international education. My name is Audrey. My co host David and I bring almost 50 years of combined experience teaching overseas to the table. This episode focuses on an important PD component of Project Zero called the Project Zero Classroom Summer Institutes that our guest Jim Reese helped coordinate for many years. Before you listen to it, we strongly recommend you listen to the first interview with Jim, in which he gives an overview of Project Zero, so you'll have a better handle on the whole idea behind this research group and their mission. Our guiding question for the episode was, what are some ways to make the learning experience at professional learning conferences more sticky and more apt to be integrated into the teaching practices of participants? This show was recorded on April 14th, 2025. Stick with us as Jim Reese, longtime professional development guru, visionary, and lucid thinker, gives a clear mandate and template for PD organizers, participants, and school leaders to ensure successful delivery and adoption of helpful, meaningful PD.
Hello, Jim. Welcome back to the Educators Going Global podcast. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, David. Good to see you too. Hey, Audrey.
Hi.
So when we were lining this up, having worked with you and having known you for a long time, I knew there'd be many topics to cover. So that's why we're having this second show. We're going to get into the guiding question in just a moment. So we always start off with where in the world are you? And you are in one of my favorite places, Jim. So where are you?
So I'm in Washington, D.C. I live in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, and I'm sitting in my study in the back of my apartment. And I'm looking out on a gray day, but it's nice and warm here in Washington for springtime.
Most excellent. And the spring is just a wonderful time to be in Washington, and it's baseball season as well.
Baseball season, it's cherry blossom season, and it's allergy season.
Yeah. And it's always museum season. Man,
Yeah.
I used to live just across the river there in Virginia and made many a trip into those museums. All right, Jim, do you have a going global story for us?
Yeah, so I'll tell a story about some of the current work that I'm doing in Shanghai. So about a year and a half ago, it was in the fall of 2023, I was invited to speak at an international conference at a school in the UK. And so I went, and my head of school went. And we met there a fellow who was leaving a friend's school in a Quaker school in the UK to go to be the headmaster at a bilingual school in China, in Shanghai. And he really liked the content of the talk that I gave. And he also came to a workshop that I did on teaching for understanding and using thinking routines in the classroom. And he really connected well with my head of school. And so he started a conversation with us about coming to visit the school once he got settled there, to bring these ideas to them and to see if there was some kind of, connection we could make, a partnership we could build. And we have a lot of similarities in that we're both bilingual schools. The school I was in Washington, both bilingual schools, both do the IB diploma. And our kids are generally going to the US or to the UK or Canada for university. So we had a lot of similarities in that way. Other ways we're very different in that the private school in China has to follow the government curriculum on many levels, has a lot of government mandates it has to follow, whereas we're completely independent of government intervention in our school in the US. Other differences as well. They're doing Mandarin and English, and we're doing French, Spanish, and English. So anyway, there were a lot of areas that we agreed on and felt sort of compatible with. But he really wanted to work on elevating the teaching and learning, and he thought Project Zero ideas could really help them. So anyway, all that fast forward, last April, he invited my head of school and me to spend a week at the school. And I was already doing some work in Central Asia at another school. So I just tacked on a trip to Shanghai to be able to go spend a week there. And we had a great time. We really got to know the school well. We got to visit classrooms. We got to talk with teachers, with the administration, and so forth. And we did some workshops there for the teachers and administrators as well. And they got really excited about our summer institute called WISIT that we have at Washington International School. So they sent 6 teachers to our summer institute last year. And so we thought that's a commitment because it's a pretty penny to send 6 teachers to the United States from Shanghai and then to pay the registration fee and the hotels and all of that. So we thought that's a commitment. And so then he and a team of leaders from the school came to our school in the fall to think, do we want to cement this partnership? What are some other things that we can work on together? And so we had really great time working together to think about how this partnership could look. So he brought one of my colleagues and me back this spring for 2 weeks, and we're working on not only thinking about how they can build a professional development program that is really powerful based on understanding and thinking from year 1 to year 12, but we're also thinking about how they can build a network within East China, Shanghai and East China, that can support this kind of work, just like we've done in Washington, D.C. And they'd love to have their own version of WISIT at some point in the near future. And they're going to open a school in Hong Kong soon as well. So they feel that's a perfect time to think about how do we make sure that these practices that we're really interested in also are in place in Hong Kong. So I spent this time in Shanghai really digging in deeply with teachers. The 6 teachers who came to WISIT last summer all invited us into their classroom. So we spent time with them. We had nice long conversations about the impact that WISIT had on them. And we could see it in the documentation they had in their classrooms and their teaching practices and their enthusiasm about it. So they're sending another group to WISIT this summer. And so we just feel this relationship is growing in all kinds of wonderful ways.
And for our listeners, Jim's going to explain what the acronym WISIT means, because this show is all about professional learning, and he's going to unpack that in just a second. Audrey's going to take us through the guiding question.
Yeah, but before we get to the guiding question, I just want to impress on our listeners that if they haven't listened to our first show with Jim about the article When Change Has Legs, and where he gives a background about Project Zero, I think that's well worth a listen before you listen to this show. So just some advice there for you. Because this episode is going to focus on an important professional development component of Project Zero that's called the Project Zero Classroom Summer Institutes. So, Jim, if you would take a couple moments to speak about the history of the Harvard Project Zero Classroom Summer Institutes that you helped coordinate for many years.
Yeah, so the Project Zero Classroom Summer Institute started back in 1997. That was the first year. And I think there was a brief hiatus during the pandemic. I think they didn't have one in 2020, but then they did a virtual one in 2021. But now they're back to doing it in person. So they're close to 30 years of having held this Summer Institute. And it's a week of very intense learning on the Harvard campus with researchers from Project Zero, this research group that's based at the Graduate School of Education, and with practitioners of Project Zero ideas from all around the world. So they tap into international school faculty, they tap into public school faculty, private school faculty, and they have people coming really from all over the world as faculty members, but also as participants. And it attracts 300 to 350 teachers every year. It sells out very, very quickly. And it's just a really wonderful week of deep learning about Project Zero frameworks, their implementation in various settings, and then offers ways to keep the learning going throughout the year, the ensuing year. And back in 2001, I went to my first one. I was brought on as a study group leader. Every day there's a study group that meets to really process the ideas and to dig in more deeply and to build an action plan for how you might take these ideas back and put them into place in your own context. So I was a study group leader, and I led what we called mini courses, which were 2.5-hour workshops. And eventually they brought me on as a leader of the Summer Institute. So from 2006 to 2016, I think those 11 years, I was the education coordinator. So I was hiring the faculty, I was building the curriculum, and then making sure the day-to-day running of it was smooth and intense, but also fun for participants. I left that role in 2016 to start my own summer institute here in DC. That's what we call the Washington International School Summer Institute for Teachers. And it's based on the Project Zero classroom model, but we built it to support teaching just in the DC area, so in the District, Maryland, and Virginia suburbs. And so that's been going on now for 11 years. We're in our 12th year this year. But it's very, very similar in terms of the structure and the goals. So the PZC, we call it the Project Zero Classroom, is really truly an institution now in professional learning. We get a lot of international school people who come, and it's really changed a lot of teachers' lives. And they've taken those ideas with them when they've gone from one school to another.
Awesome. I just love hearing about all these collaborations and connections and spreading the love. And now we know what WISIT is, so that was helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
So, the guiding question for this second episode is, what are some ways to make the learning experiences at professional learning conferences like WISIT more sticky and more apt to be integrated into the practices of participants? Because we know a lot of times teachers go to these conferences, there's the EARCOS and NISA and ASA and AMISA conferences and so on. And they're wonderful. And then they go back to their school and may or may not use the practices in their classroom and may or may not share them with the rest of the faculty. So that's what we're kind of trying to get at here. So the first sub-question for this show is, how can conference organizers make PD conferences more sticky and ensure better participant follow-through in applying their learning to their classroom practice?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's probably the stickiest question, I think, that conference organizers have to deal with. And I'm not sure that many do deal with that. And I thought about this deeply when I was working with the Project Zero classroom and certainly with WISIT. And I would say we built the model for WISIT to address that question head on. So I'll get to that. But let me step back and think about what kinds of things conference organizers should be thinking about to make the great ideas that are being shared with others, make them stick with participants. So I think, first of all, they need to have a plan to make sure that what is being offered is sticky, is worth trying out, is worth taking back, is worth sharing, and that kind of thing. And if you've got that checked off, you've really got dynamic speakers, workshop leaders, that kind of thing. That's great. We've built a workshop model through the Project Zero Classroom and through WISIT that I think is really important. And it's not trademarked with Project Zero or with Jim Reese or anything. It's something that I think most practitioners would recognize as really good practice, but I'm not sure that you often see it at conferences. But that you've got to really highly engage participants, just like you have to highly engage your students and your class to get them excited about the learning and to get everybody on board. So that's a baseline kind of thing you need to do at the beginning of a workshop. But what we've done is we've always, instead of having the teacher come up and explain and try to tell everybody what is going on in his or her classroom, or let me just walk you through what I do or my schedule or whatever it is, have the teachers feel what it's like to be a student learning in a sticky, complex situation. So when the teachers can understand what the students are going through, they're going to think more deeply about how they set up the learning in their own practice. And if they're feeling uncomfortable, then they might think about, is the uncomfortable a good uncomfortable, or is it an uncomfortable that's going to be an obstacle to my learning? And therefore, the wheels are starting to turn about what they need to do in their own situation if they want to take this idea back. That's one thing. So we always do a modeling of whatever practice it is that we're going to present. And if we're dealing with an early childhood classroom, certainly you're not going to teach it in the same way with a group of adults, but you can adapt it. So to have workshop presenters who know how to adapt it, but then give the teachers time to reflect on it and to think about how it felt, and then to think about how they might apply it to their own context. So building in the time for reflection and building in the time for application, those things are just so important. And that's step one. I think that's at least giving the idea or ideas a chance to live when it goes back home with the people in the workshop. The second thing is that the conference organizers need to think about, what are ways to keep the learning alive? have you as a conference organizer set up an infrastructure that helps people stay in touch? Or can you give resources that can help them further their learning? So thinking about that, if are you going to offer some online courses or chances for people to get together? Or at the Project Zero classroom, one of the best ways we did that was dividing all the 300 and something participants into small groups of, we call them study groups, where 15 people or so were led by one or two really, really strong facilitators who got to know each other really well over the course of a week. They met together daily and they processed the ideas together daily. And oftentimes those facilitators kept that group together online. They might have dispersed around the world after the conference or the institute, but they stayed together through email, through other kinds of online forums, and they kept the ideas alive. Some very, very like really special but very simple things happened. So facilitators sometimes had the participants write a postcard to themselves about what idea they were taking back with them and what they really wanted to keep alive in their practice. And then the facilitator mailed it to them 3 months later. So the postcard arrived in the mail, or maybe it was an email, but it arrived in the mail. And the person had that reminder, oh, I want to capture that excitement I had back in August or July. And I'm going to, if I haven't been doing much about it, I'm going to try to do it now. So things like that we did at the Project Zero classroom. But because we had people coming from all over the world, it was really hard to keep track of all those people, what they were doing and what impact we were having. So again, we did it in a very ad hoc kind of way. Sometimes so the school might be involved in it with a project with Project Zero, or they might have teams that would take online courses because we had the online course offerings, or they might send a new team the next year and they would set up, we had sometimes workshops on how to build the infrastructure within a school to keep these ideas alive. And they might try to follow some of those practices and do it. So we did that kind of thing, but I would say we didn't track things necessarily all that well because it was just too big a task and we didn't have people on staff at Project Zero who could do that kind of thing. So when we started WISIT in Washington, again, I was really adamant that we were going to build this for the DC area educators. And so I said, look, if we keep it local, then we can build a local network that we can support one another. And so we can have face-to-face workshops or meetings throughout the year. If people are available and they want to come, they don't have to come to every one. They can come to whatever they want to, but we give them opportunities to be able to keep this learning alive. And again, we had these incredible partners with museums. And so the National Gallery of Art would host a workshop, or the Smithsonian American Art Museum would host a workshop, or the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum would host a workshop. And we would get 60 people coming on a workday after school to dig into ideas that had been presented at WISIT, but now we're going to go a little bit more deeply. Or they'd come to our school, or they'd go to another school and see a practice in place. And so that kept us going. We also created a newsletter. So we had a mailing list and we could send out a newsletter monthly to highlight some of the work that was happening around the area and some of the practitioners who were being acknowledged for some of the work that they were doing. And then also promote workshops with like-minded organizations or museums or other schools that might be doing something that was aligned with our beliefs. So I think to think about what you can do as a conference organizer to create opportunities for people to stay involved, to hold themselves accountable. If you ask yourselves those questions, then you're going to land on some really interesting things, especially if you open it up and you let people, in a sense, kind of crowdsource the ideas.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic ideas. I like the reminder. I like the community. I like the acknowledgement as well, because a lot of times that's something that really motivates teachers, is just to be acknowledged for the work that they're doing. So just some terrific ideas. Thank you for sharing those.
As a participant in a WISIT Summer Institute, I can say one of the most powerful aspects was the study group, the learning group. The idea of taking the ideas and sharing them with others, and then the action focus of how we're going to move forward with these. That was part of the mantra that one experienced. And that's a good segue as we move into our next question. How about the participant perspective on all this? So what can participants do to make the most of conferences, to design a pathway to carry their learning into their classroom practices? And when I put this together, I really focused on that word design. So what do you have to say about that, Jim?
Yeah, so I think participants can do a number of things. At WISIT, I was always the MC, so I was up on stage every day introducing the speakers or giving people instructions on where we're going next or that kind of thing. And on the last day, we had a through line for the week that was around how do we take these ideas back with us and try to put them in practice and keep them sustained over time. And part of that was, how do I find a support network that will do that? So we often offered our network as a way to do that, but we said that's not the only way. And I talked about the sort of the 10% rule, that you've been exposed to a lot of things here. Every day you've got new ideas or expanded your ideas about something. You met a lot of people. Take about 10% of that. Don't try to take everything back that you're going to that you've learned, but take about 10% of that, or even it's just one thing that you're going to try out and you're going to do it really well. But you're also going to invite someone in. So invite David in, invite Audrey in to see what you're doing, and invite them in on your journey. Don't tell them that you have perfected this and you want them to see how great your students are or how great you are as a teacher. Tell them you're trying something out and you're a little bit nervous about it and you like to get their feedback and just to get them to share with you what they think about what you're trying. So you start a dialogue. So take a stance of humility, inviting someone in on your journey. And so you can do those kinds of things quite easily. How can you hold yourself accountable? Maybe there's someone here, maybe you don't have somebody back at your school that you feel has sympathy with what you're trying to do or the way you're trying to teach, but you met somebody here who seems to really have that special thing that you're looking for. Get their email address and stay in touch with them, and maybe visit their school or have them come visit you. But there are many, many ways that you can support yourself if you don't feel you have that support back in school. We also caution people about going back and trying to do a workshop on all that I learned at WISIT or all that I learned at the Project Zero classroom. If you're asked to speak, and that's a great thing, if you're asked to speak at a faculty meeting or at a department meeting, that's great. But again, present it as a journey. Do it with a stance of humility. I've just learned these things and I'm trying them out. They fit really nicely with what I've been trying to do in my classroom, but I want to now push my students' thinking a bit further. And I'm going to try this one thinking routine out for several weeks just to see what happens. And I'm going to document it. I'd love to have you share with, maybe next time I'll come and bring some of the documentation and we can look at it together. So again, inviting people in, offering things, but don't present yourself as the expert because you've just been to a 5-day conference on a lot of ideas that have been worked on for decades over the past 20 or 30 years. So those are some things that we've been thinking about. I do want to share one little anecdote that I picked up from Tina Blythe, who's a researcher at Project Zero and has been a good friend and mentor for many years. But she was a middle school English teacher, and she has a story from her own practice she calls the Driftwood story. It goes way back to her early years of teaching, and she and a colleague were going to a conference together. And Tina was really, really frustrated. She said, here I'm missing school. I had to do subplans. I'm missing a couple of days with my students. And this conference just isn't very stimulating. The speakers aren't speaking about things that really matter to me. The workshops don't seem to be that relevant. I feel like I'm just wasting my time. This is just horrible. So she got to such a boiling point that she spilled it with her colleague and said, I just can't believe the school sent us to this conference. It's a waste of our time. It's a waste of their money. I can't believe. And so the friend said, Tina, I look at any professional development opportunity as the way I look at walking along the beach. I walk along the beach and I love driftwood and I love taking things back to my home and keeping them as reminders for that calm that I had when I was walking along the beach. But I can't pick up every seashell and every piece of driftwood on the beach. That would be crazy. So I always look for that one piece of driftwood that is really, really special. And I take that one back with me. And I treat professional development like that as well. Yes, this isn't the greatest conference I've ever been to. It could have been a lot better, but there's something here that I know I can try out that will make my practice better. So I'm looking for that one thing. So I'm putting on a really critical lens and I'm trying to find that one thing that is going to make me a better teacher. And Tina said from that moment on, that's how she has viewed professional development learning. And she shares that anecdote at the end of the Project Zero classroom every year as a way to help participants go back and think about what's your piece of driftwood that you want to put into place in your practice. And it's been, again, I've known this story for about 20 years now, and it's still as inspiring to me today as it was when I first heard it.
What I find interesting about that is that, of course, you're not going to, you probably know the little adage, you can't please all the people all the time. So certainly there's going to be aspects that the organizers think are really amazing, and not every participant is going to think it's amazing. So I like that idea of sort of mining the beach for driftwood. That's really A great metaphor. So then let's look at it from the perspective of a school that has sent some teachers to these summer institutes or any kind of PD conference and really want to support them in making sure that they've made the most of their learning. What are some suggestions you've got there?
Yeah, so I think something I alluded to earlier is, and you did as well, is the idea that the school should provide opportunities for the teacher or teachers to share. And that's a tricky one because again, you don't want them to come back as the experts who are now going to, give their knowledge to everybody else. That creates kind of an inside outside group that I talked about in the last podcast. It also sets the person up who's not the expert yet. If you've just come back from a conference, you're not the expert. But to give opportunities to share what they learned, why it was important, and what they're thinking about doing in their own practice, and to then invite people in to be on this journey with me. I think that's a really smart way to do it. And whether it's very informally, it could be just some sharing at a faculty meeting in a small group. It could be at a department meeting or a team meeting, that kind of thing. The school should provide those opportunities. Some things that I've done when I was in charge of faculty professional development in schools that I think really helped is if we made a big investment in someone going to a 5-day summer institute or conference around the world or something like that, then I asked them to come back with questions that they wanted to now explore in their own practice. They might have that piece of driftwood, but I asked them to frame it in the form of a question, an open-ended question about their practice. And so I asked them to think about that question over the course of either the whole year or at least over a few months. And we would come back and have conversations around that. That led to our forming learning groups in our school, where teachers would get together on a regular basis on their own time, voluntarily, to explore these questions of practice. And a lot of times the questions came from either a workshop they had in school or a workshop they had at a conference they were sent to. So again, asking people to think about the questions that this conference has raised for them and then what they think they might do about that. I think the learning group idea is really great. If people come back from a conference and they want to stay together and talk about it and invite others in, I think that's a wonderful thing. So provide the infrastructure for them to do that, whether it might have to be after school. So provide them with refreshments or buy them a book or that they really want to dig into, or do something to give them the incentives to want to stay after school or to do that. If you can build it into the schedule of the day, that's all the better, so that teachers with commitments after school don't feel the burden of having to stay. To have a regular exhibition of learning or celebration of learning. And we at schools I've been in or schools that I've worked with, to have celebrations of learning that feature teacher voices. So what's some teacher learning that's going on here alongside student learning? Those kinds of things are really valuable. So I went to this really great conference out in Kathmandu, and I was at Audrey's school, and I learned these 5 things. And I really wanted to put them into place. But what I found is that 5 was too big a number. So I narrowed it down to 3. But you're documenting that kind of learning journey in your exhibition. And then you're showing the questions that you had and then showing what you tried to do. This failed, but this really worked. And here's something I want to keep and I want to refine next year. And here's what I'm thinking about. But it shows, it models for students, but it models for colleagues that teachers are lifelong learners, that we don't master teaching. Teaching is something that we're always working on. And every year we have different groups of students who learn differently. And we have challenges that we never anticipated, or these kids just aren't like those kids I had 5 years ago. What's going on with this generation? You've got to always be curious and willing to adapt to the kinds of learners you have. And so that kind of exhibition of learning gives that model for the lifelong learning that we need to engage in as educators.
So going forward, my question is, where do you see the format of professional learning? What are options with professional learning? So before you answer that, though, I wanted you just to kind of review DCPZ, the idea that, and we're going to put this in the framework of international schools. You mentioned in the previous episode about your work with international schools in Northern Europe forming their own networks. So that was one way to build a structure. That connects to your work with Washington, D.C.-PZ for Project Zero. I still get emails from that crew. They are so active. That is an example of that. And then you're also talking about the idea, and we're not saying it specifically, but international schools, I guess some of them put on their own professional learning opportunities for maybe that city where they are. And they pull talent in from the various schools. Maybe they bring in finances for that as well. So just maybe a quick review of that. And then where do you see professional learning going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the first part of that informs the second part for me in terms of where I see it going and where it could go. So I think those two questions are really well connected. So I guess I think about my own professional trajectory over the last like 40 years, and I realize when I look back on my career and what I've done, not only as a teacher but as an administrator and then as a consultant, I realized that even back in high school, I was connecting people. I was bringing people together from like different backgrounds to hold meetings or conferences, that kind of thing. And I never realized that that was something that I gravitated toward or that that was going to be my life's work. But in the end, it has become that especially over the last 10, 15 years. And so I really believe in this idea of sharing the journey and not working in isolation. And I think that a lot of that goes back to my very first year of teaching. I had been in a wonderful teacher preparation program for career changers. And I was placed in a school as an intern for a year while I took my graduate level courses to be licensed in the United States to teach. And it was such a wonderful year of sharing. I had people coming into my classroom all the time from the university, from the school, to give me feedback, to tell me how I was doing, to give me pointers. And I was going into classrooms all the time. And the minute I was hired by the school where I interned, and the minute I started my first year of teaching, I felt so incredibly isolated because all of that stopped. I got an evaluation. The assistant principal came in maybe 2 times a year, 3 times a year to give me an evaluation out of context. It wasn't very meaningful. We didn't have a conversation about teaching and learning. It was just about you did this, this, and this correctly. You did this, this, and this that you can work on. And that was it. And all of the support and sharing that was part of my internship here went away. I actually wrote an article about it and got it published in English Journal, which is a national publication for English teachers. And I lamented the isolation that beginning teachers feel. And I think most of my career has worked to eliminate that sense of isolation that teachers can feel. And so this idea of connecting people, getting people within a school or with other schools to share in the journey, the learning journey, is just so important to me. And I think you only become better when you have other people on your journey with you. I really believe in social constructivism and Vygotsky and the idea that we learn in conjunction with others. We learn because of others around us and with others on our journey. All of that to say that when I was working at the Project Zero classroom, as I mentioned earlier, as the education coordinator, I was really frustrated that we weren't keeping people together, that we weren't able to track what was happening to them. Some we did, but there were so many people who just went off and we never knew the impact. We filled up the next year, we sold out quickly, those kinds of things. So we knew we were successful, but were we really making a difference in the world? And so part of the impetus for starting WISIT was to be able to track that, to know that we are making a difference. And this school has changed because of what WISIT brought them. This teacher has changed because of what WISIT brought her and what she gained at WISIT and took back to her school. So that was really, really important to me. And so I really believe in the idea that we need to build networks. So pre-WISIT, we had worked 2 years on building a network in DC called, as you mentioned, DCPZ or DC Project Zero. So it's a group of people, very informal, of practitioners who are really excited about Project Zero ideas. Whatever that might mean, like we're really excited about Project Zero ideas and we want to learn more. So we get in a room together and we learn together and then we try things out and then we bring them back and we share. And then we have a chance at WISIT to either put on workshops or to lead a study group or just to come and learn more. So we have this sort of an ecosystem network that sustains itself and we support people. We went from 40 people initially back in 2012 to now about 2,500 people on our mailing list, people who have somehow either attended one of our events, come to WISIT, or asked to be part of our network. And so we keep that group together, and it changes every year because people are coming and going from the area, or they get out of teaching, or for whatever reason. But we've stayed at that like 2,500 mark now for about the past 7 or 8 years. And so the idea is that now we can really track what's going on in the DC area, and we can tap into the expertise that we've helped build over these last 11 years with WISIT and for the last 13 years with DC Project Zero. So that's really important to me. And I got a taste of that when I was working in Brussels at an international school, and we had a consortium of international schools who were trying to do the same kind of thing. So I used that as a model, and then I borrowed from what other people were doing in those schools to sort of build an ecosystem within a school, to build a network within a school. So I've just taken those ideas with me, I think, wherever I've gone. And I can't claim credit for any of it as an original idea. I've just borrowed from other experiences that I've had and then taken them with me wherever I've gone. And I've been lucky enough to be in schools that value that and hire me for that kind of expertise or that kind of knowledge.
So where do you see the next steps with professional learning? This model, I can say from experience, that for me works. And from your experience now, you're able to track it and you're getting the feedback. It works. Do you see any changes in the path or stay steady?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that can be improved in the PD models. I think it's the kind of thing that can always be tweaked, can always be worked on. I don't think it needs to be thrown out and reinvented. I'll sort of put what I think are professional development opportunities in four buckets, and you might have others you would add to this from your experiences in schools. But there's the big conference. So what we call the Summer Institute is a big conference. Sometimes conferences can last over a weekend. Sometimes they can last a week. Sometimes they can be online. Sometimes they can be in person. But you have these big conferences, and we've all, as teachers, attended many of them over the years. Then there's in-house PD that the school sets up, that the school might bring in experts, or it might have expertise from within, but it has regular PD days, it has PD afternoons, it has all kinds of ways it does PD, pre-service, post-service PD that happens at the beginning and end of a school year. Then a relatively new idea is the just-in-time kind of PD, where you're really working on questions that teachers have in the moment. So a teacher is struggling with a student who just lacks focus, and everything I try seems to fail with this particular student. I need to work with someone to just really work on how do I get to this kid and get this kid to focus in my class or whatever it might be. So you're really addressing issues that are arising in the moment for teachers. And I call that just-in-time PD. I've borrowed that term from others. And we've experimented with that in my previous school, just to have, might have a 45-minute conversation or a 45-minute workshop or something that happens just during the day when somebody is free and you can get 2 or 3 people together to deal with it. Or it could be, let's get together after school and just dig into this new technology that's come out, and we want to try it out and see what the possibilities are in our own practice and with furthering learning. So that's the third. And then the fourth one would be deep dives. And this can include institutes, so longer than a conference, but it might be 5 days, might be 7 days, something like that. It can also be courses, so that you have regular times, maybe once every week or once every 2 weeks when you meet. Could be in person, can be online. Ongoing workshops. So it might be there's a step 1 and a step 2 and a step 3 to learning something, and you're having these ongoing workshops. And then PLCs or learning groups. I call them learning groups, but PLCs are professional learning communities, have been a very popular thing here in the United States. I think it's been popular in international schools, where there might be a change initiative, or there might be some things the school is trying, and teachers get together on a regular basis. It might be mandated, it might be voluntary, but they get together on a regular basis. They self-select into these groups, and they dig into it over the course of a year. And they might read a book together, or they might read articles together, or they might try things out. They might visit each other's classrooms, all kinds of things that are happening. And that's ongoing PD within the school, but it's not formally where everybody's organized in a room together, and it's not going away anywhere. You might go visit other schools, but that's just part of what you've decided you want to do. But they're really teacher-led, teacher-organized, and self-selected. And they really have the potential, I think, to be really powerful when they're done well. I've never worked in a school that has mandated PLCs or learning groups. I've generally been the person in the schools I've been in who started them, because I learned the model from Project Zero and just loved it. But we always have made them voluntary, but we've always had a high level of involvement. And, people's lives have gotten busy and they've had to drop out halfway through, or they've said, I'm really busy in the fall, but I'd love to join in the spring. Is that possible? And I've always said, yes, whatever you can commit to it, do it. But I say, if you're going to commit, then please try to commit for the whole semester, and then we can have a reconstitution of the group in the next semester, just so there's some consistency and all that. But I've always tried to make it so that we can do these during the day or within contract hours right after school, that kind of thing, so that people aren't having to give up their own precious free time, but they're giving up time that they're required to be at the school to meet in these groups. And they usually meet for about an hour, and they're digging in. There's a facilitator or co-facilitators who are guiding the group. But basically, the teachers are setting the agenda. The people who would participate are deciding who's sharing, what they're doing, what they're digging into. But they have one big question or one big topic that they're pursuing over the course of a year. And it can often connect to like their professional goals that they have for evaluation and that kind of thing. So they can document like what they're doing to build on that goal to learn in the way that they've said they wanted to learn. So I think that kind of deep dive piece is the fourth bucket that is probably the most meaningful of all of these that I mentioned. But those are the four ways I see it. And I think where we in schools can do better, all those things have existed for a long time. They've existed in various ways and means. The way we can do better is creating the opportunities for them to be more meaningful, have more accountability, be more self-directed, those kinds of things, so that they become really, really relevant to the teacher and the teaching staff.
So you just hit on what I was going to say, the idea, and I don't know how you say agency in French or Spanish.
Or Mandarin.
Or Mandarin. But it's that personalized learning. That's the term. And Jeff and I used to talk about this all the way back to the Shifting Our Schools podcast. And it's kind of going above that umbrella of buckets, that teachers have a menu of choices and you have agency. And your school, if you're international especially, they're going to provide funding. The big thing's going to be time. You got to work that out. But make that plan, go into which of the buckets you want to go into and put that plan together. And then with the world of digital learning, there's so much that you can put together just in your own kind of very personalized bucket, from reading to podcast listening to some of us still blog, that you can pull that information in. One of the things that a theme has run through both of these shows is it all comes back to what is your practice, what is your craft in your classroom, and what do you want to work on? And then what are some, maybe the current year, what are some needs that your children are presenting that you, like you were saying a moment ago, that you need to work on? Some of this can be just in time. Some of it can be much more longer. I want to grow in the area of helping kids really with their critical thinking skills, for example. So thank you for laying that out, Jim.
Yeah. Just add on something to what you said, Dave. I also think that having that kind of goal last from year to year is a good thing, not a bad thing. So I think sometimes people who are in charge of evaluation expect that there's a new goal every year or there's something new to work on. And I think certainly the complexion of it might change or should change, but these goals sometimes don't fit within a school year. They are things that are taking us into a deep dive in our practice, and therefore we might reconstitute the question in some way, but it's still the same topic that we're working on. If it's about thinking, that's never going to go away. I really want to help my students learn to ask better questions without having to be prompted by me. I want them to be presented with something and to start asking their own questions. And that seems to be a real problem with third graders right now. They seem to be so dependent on the adult in the room to tell them what to think. And I really want to help them build some independence. Well, that's something you can start working on, but you might need 2 or 3 years of trial and error, of working with different kinds of third graders, working with your colleagues, thinking about what they're doing to really figure that out and to really work on the plan that's going to sustain you for the next 10 years. So I think, being flexible with how those work. Another problem, I think, is that evaluators oftentimes set this up. Yes, we've got an evaluation system. You've got to come up with a question. You've got to come up with a plan. And then at the end of the year, there's such a rush to get all these things in and to work on renewing contracts or whatever else that it's just glossed over, and you can put the biggest crap in the world on your plan, and it's approved because nobody has really vetted it very carefully, or they haven't thought carefully about how this fits into the initiatives of the school and the goals of the school. And then you might have a great lofty goal, and then you just have crap that you put in there for what you've done, and nobody's going to hold you accountable because I've got to get all these 15 evaluations done. And so I think it's incumbent upon leaders to sort of share that. So if teachers have true agency and they take that seriously and they really believe that the leaders in the school want them to have that agency and trust them, then they hold themselves accountable within their departments or within their teams, and they check each other's and they push each other along. And that's a check that you can have built into that kind of system. And I've never worked in a school that has done that well, I promise you. And my 30-something years of working in schools, I've never been in a school that has done that well.
Thank you for bringing that up. These performance appraisal systems, oh my gosh. But thanks for
Another
mentioning
podcast.
that. It is. Oh,
Well, what strikes me is the presence of the leaders. As you were saying before, if, say, they occasionally showed up to your PLC or to come and observe in your classroom, specifically with the intention of spotting you, you know, one of my teacher training professors, Wally Miller, great guy, had a slogan, catch a kid being good. So catch a teacher being involved in what they said they were going to do and then compliment them on it in a way that it gets heard. I mean, I like your point about at the end of the school year, all the stuff that's going on and all the evaluations that have to be done. So it's a challenge to make sure you've given it full due attention. But maybe if there were a way to kind of do it throughout the year, sprinkle in some kind of ongoing progress reporting. But anyway, I think your main point there about if the teachers are really motivated and engaged and into what they're doing, then they'll be doing it. And you don't really need the accountability as much. It's just kind of part and parcel of who they are, what they do, and what they're excited about doing for their students. So, hopefully a lot of this just comes down to the professionalism of the teachers. And then the reason that they're writing the so-called pile of crap into their evaluation is because that is an exercise in ticking a box, not because they aren't excited about the thing they're doing. So
Exactly.
hopefully, let's keep the faith that that's what's actually happening behind the scenes. So this has really been revelatory. And, I was just harking back to several PD experience that I've been in. And I sure could have used someone like you who was kind of informing and looking at the practices of the PD practitioners and making them much more valuable for me as a teacher, as a participant on the receiving end, and then also administrators and leaders when you get back to school, sort of seeing it through and helping support in that way. So a lot of rich ideas and information. But I'm wondering if there are any other topics that you might want to address at this point.
Yeah, I think there's this, I guess it's sort of related to this, but I just believe in this idea of constant renewal, that I think you've got that in international schools with people coming and going. And so I think it's something that we ought to embrace and celebrate, and that every time there's renewal, there's an opportunity for changing or learning something new. And I think professional learning ought to be like that as well. I know others like state school systems quite well outside of the United States, having lived, in different places or spent extended time in different countries. And I've seen systems that are very centralized, and teachers in those systems sometimes think, oh, I went to teacher training school, I got my degree, I got my license, I'm 21 years old, and I know everything, and I never am going to change, and I'm going to teach like this for the next 40 years. And that happens here in the United States. It happens everywhere. But I've seen state school systems that are like, that's the way that things are done. And that kills learning. It kills curiosity. And the kids who thrive in that kind of situation are the kinds of kids who would thrive in any situation because they're just naturally curious, and they don't care what kind of teacher they have. They're going to want to learn about the world. But those kids who need to be motivated, who need to be inspired, or who might have some challenges in their learning, they need teachers who are modeling learning and showing them different ways to learn and that kind of thing. And that's a lifelong journey. I mean, we can't learn those things in teacher training school. We can't learn those things at a workshop. We've got to work at them, and we've got to build in the experience, and we've got to build in the expertise that others can give us, and we've got to share, we've got to try things out. And all those things are about, understanding. We talk about that in teaching for understanding, but it's also about teaching to understand how to teach effectively. And that constant renewal is just so important in professional learning. And if a teacher doesn't embrace it, then I would say that's a big red flag. And if we are in charge of hiring, if we're in charge of firing, if we're in charge of applying for schools that we want to go to, and if we see that that's the default attitude of the administrators or the teachers, that we just want you to come in and get like sevens on the diploma for your students, or we just want you to come in and just teach the way you've always been teaching, that's a red flag, and we should avoid that at all costs.
Well, it makes me think too about teacher training institutes and the extent to which they instill in teachers that lifetime desire to improve their practice and to be learners themselves and to model the thinking about thinking and so on. So, maybe there's some accountability piece there as well that we could look into, but just wonderful information.
And Jim, to continue the learning and the renewal, how can people follow you to pick up on professional learning? You were just involved in the Project Zero workout on the West Coast. How can they follow you?
Yeah, so probably the best way to follow me is on LinkedIn. So you can just look up Jim Reese, and I'm in Washington, D.C. So if there are other Jim Reeses out there, it's a fairly common name. I'm the one in Washington, D.C., and I use that for professional articles and things I'm thinking about, and then highlighting other people who are inspiring me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to get us thinking about professional development, about making it sticky, about really involving teachers in diving deep and continuing the learning as they go and modeling for their students this love of learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
And I'll say to our audience, we're going to do a show where Audrey asked me about some of my lessons learned in my career. And one of my lessons is, and it's the word you've been using throughout these episodes, there are frameworks out there, and a lot of them are from Project Zero. So if you as an individual or as a school aren't that familiar with some or all of the frameworks that are provided, take a deep dive. Start out at the website. It's in the show notes. And then, if possible, find out if you can go to one of the summer institutes, because they're research-based. They've got practitioners, and then they've got all these people who have attended who carry that knowledge all over the world. And Jim, I've seen Jim as MC. He's the natural. I've seen how valuable these institutes can be, so keep that in mind. And Jim, thank you once again you were on one of our previous podcasts as well, and I know this has been a long morning for you, and you've shared so much. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. And also, I mentioned that WISIT was designed specifically for the local educators, but during the pandemic, we opened up to anybody who wanted to come because we were doing it virtually. And now we regularly have people coming from around the United States and around the world. So again, look at WISIT if the PCC fills up or if it's not convenient. We do ours in August, and it's a great week of learning. If you're in the States or near Washington, think about coming.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
and David,
inviting you to travel,
teach,
and connect with us.